Welcome to another edition of The Smugglers Den. That's right, The Smugglers Den is back, but it is being rebranded and relaunched as a Star Wars Destiny podcast. I'm really excited about this. I've played about 100 games so far of this game that hasn't even been released. By the way, Tabletop Simulator, I'm telling you, that's where you want to go if you want to get some Destiny games and some Destiny talk in. But I'm excited to bring a new episode of The Smugglers Den with some Destiny talk, and this week I'm joined by Travis. How you doing, Travis? Welcome to The Smugglers Den.
I'm doing pretty good, Tiny. I hope you're feeling the same way, and it's good to be on the show.
I am feeling great. It feels good to be back with The Smugglers Den. If you're missing Ben, if you're missing Neil, well, they haven't played Destiny yet. Send them a message. Tell them, guys, I want to hear your thoughts on Destiny. So hopefully once Destiny comes out, there'll be regulars on the show as well. And we'll sort of go from there. So, Travis, I want to talk a little bit about ourselves. First episode. Hi, I'm Tiny Grimes, big Star Wars fan. How about yourself, Travis? Do you like Star Wars fan? Do you hate Star Wars? You somewhere in the middle?
I assume since that I'm on a Destiny podcast, it's pretty obvious I love Star Wars. I got into Star Wars from like the youngest age I could possibly comprehend what was going on. I remember my father took me to see the re-release of the original films in theaters back in the early 90s. I was like 95, 94, somewhere around there.
Sure.
Unfortunately, not quite old enough to have seen the original movies, but I'm sure that must have been a hell of a thing.
Whoa. Are you assuming that I'm super old?
Well, I might be, Tiny. I might be.
I am, and I did. I don't remember the first film in the theaters. I might have seen it, I don't know, but I definitely remember going to see Empire Strikes Back in the theaters, playing with my, especially the Hoth figures when it would snow out. I'd take them outside, I'd build snow forts, and they'd be hiding in them, hiding from the walkers and stuff. Have all kinds of fun.
Oh yeah, I definitely had a whole bunch of like little figurines and stuff as a kid. Like it had like a little resurgence with those re-releases.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I can only imagine like seeing like episode 2 for the first time in theaters,
Yeah.
or not, well, episode 5.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I forgot. You're right. It is episode 5. It's That's been a hard transition still for me. Like episode 2, I'm like Empire, and they're like, not Empire. Episode 2, the terrible movie. Oh yeah. Okay, I was shocked. You said you hated episode 2. I thought you lost your mind.
yeah, for sure. They were originally branded as episodes 1, 2, and 3, right? And then they changed that with the second release in order to promote the like new movies.
Yeah, and when I was a kid, it wasn't A New Hope. It was Star Wars. Like that was Star Wars, and then there was Empire and Jedi. But Star Wars was A New Hope. I didn't even know it was called A New Hope until I was like 17.
Oh, jeez, I've always known it as that.
All right, well, let's move on from that. A really important question I have for you is, why are you playing Destiny? What drew you into Destiny I'm assuming away from some other game that you were playing before?
All right, so this is an interesting one because for Destiny in particular, I first thought I would hate it.
Me too, by the way. Me too.
Yeah, it was like, okay, so they're like relaunching a Star Wars game. That's cool. Oh, it uses dice. I'm not a big fan of dice usually. And then I found out it was collectible, and I was like, oh god, coming from an LCG to a collectible, what is FFG doing? And then, I don't know, I was playing a lot of Conquest at the time, and if you aren't familiar with what happened to that game, Games Workshop has, revoked that license, so FFG won't be continuing that awesome game. However, what drew me to Destiny is I heard it had a very, very interactive turn structure, very similar to Conquest. And it's Star Wars, so I was like, what the hell? We'll give it a go. I don't have anything better to play right now. And it turns out, Destiny's an amazing game. I was completely sold after watching a couple of people play it and then playing it myself. It's really tactical. It feels really awesome, and I can't wait to actually have dice in my hands because I'm sure that's going to be a whole new experience compared to playing on Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah, I have a similar trajectory, though mine starts slightly differently in that I've been excited since day one because I'm always looking for games to play with my 8-year-old daughter who doesn't like super deep games, right? And so I was like, ooh, a dice game? We can open packs. She loves Star Wars. This is perfect. And then as I've played it more and more, I've realized, wow, this game is incredibly deep. There's so much strategy. My daughter will absolutely not be able to handle it. But what's so cool about the game is there's really two ways to play it, right? You can build an aggro deck without tricks, just roll dice and go, yeah, daddy, I got bunches of damage, your decks are dead. So you don't have to play on a really deep, subtle level, and I really like that about the game. That I feel like I'll have two sets of decks. I'll have the decks I play with my daughter, and I'll have the decks I play with other people who are card game players and competitively.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Compared to like other card games, especially where usually like card games sort of build upon other card games you maybe played before as like a basis of understanding for how things work. Otherwise, they can be just big mess to get into with rules references and the like. Destiny is exactly the opposite. It's very intuitive, and it has I like to think of it like a swimming pool. It has like a really large shallow end for people who like that, but if you want to get in deeper, you can go into this like surprisingly deep end as well.
Yeah, that's the thing that has shocked me the most is how deep the deep end is. I figured it wouldn't be that deep because there's only so much you can do with dice, but boy, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm really impressed. Let me ask you this then. What's been your favorite aspect of the game so far? Is there a certain mechanic that you've liked a lot? Is there just something about the game that really intrigues you?
Absolutely, the I go, you go turn structure. The I do one thing, you do one thing gives this like this feeling of like constant clashing and struggling and like reacting to what your opponent's doing or thinking like, oh, why did they do that now? Or are they setting up for like this? Or are they setting up for like to like kill my character next turn? I need to stop that. I need to make sure that that doesn't happen. And it really makes the game feel fluid. It's not like you're sitting there waiting for your opponent to finish their turn. You're constantly just interacting with them back and forth.
Totally agree. I think that's the part I like the best as well. My first major competitive game was chess, and so from that vantage point, I still love chess. It just takes forever to play games, and so the back and forth I go you go is so cool. And then because of that, there's so much bluffing and trying to figure out what your opponent does, right? Because you can re-roll any dice you want at any moment, if your opponent resolves a die showing, it means they're trying to do something. So if they take a resource, you're like, wait a second, why did he try to roll 3 damage? That seems obvious. He must want to do something with that resource. I must stop him.
Exactly. That's exactly it, too. And, you know, like, there's also that aspect of, like, when they use a die, there's, like, no real way to get it back. So you know, like, okay, that's one die that he no longer has available to him. So I have to worry about what he's going to do with these other dice as well as what he can do with, like, cards in hand.
Yeah. For me, another thing I really, really love about the game is the deck size. A 30-card deck means if you want to, you should be able to see your whole deck throughout the game. If you build into your deck various draw mechanics, there should be no problem seeing all the cards. If you build a late-game deck, you will see all the cards whether you want to or not. But I really, really like the difference between, say, Game of Thrones, which is the other main game I play, knowing I'm probably going to see at most a third of this deck throughout the game. It is so easy for stuff to be buried in the bottom 2/3 that I desperately need or want. I love that feeling of just knowing you're going to see everything. You might not see it in the order you want, you might not see it in as timely a fashion as you would rather see it, but you're going to see it all at some point.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree, especially because from a like introductory point of view for new players to get into the game, a 30-card deck is much easier to compile in like a collectible card game format than a 60-card deck. Yeah. So you can like as you're getting in, you could buy like a starter deck and then a few packs, and like right away you'll be able to make like a deck that feels completely different from the starter deck, but still feels like your deck because you don't need to collect 60 cards.
So, Travis, what's your favorite character so far? Let me start here. All the characters are actually good, I feel like. There's no character where I've looked at it and went, nope, that's a garbage character. Never gonna play it. If it's bad, it's way lower costed, and so it becomes a filler character when you're trying to play a really great character. But is there one that really jumps out at you and you said, yep, no, that's the character I'm going to be trying to use a lot?
Absolutely. I think I have to pick 2 characters. I got to break the rules a little bit here. And I'm going to go with both Han Solo and Poe Dameron. Both of them have interesting things that bring new ideas to the deck building level. So when you're building a Han Solo deck, you're building a Han Solo deck, like a deck that like only really works with Han Solo. You're going to put in these ambush cards so you get shields. You're going to put in more cards to protect Han, cards that will make Han an absolute beast so that he'll be able to just shoot people for like 7 damage a turn. And same thing goes with Poe. Poe kind of wants to have cards that you can discard that have really powerful single-side die effects. So things like the Millennium Falcon go really well with Poe, or the First Order TIE Fighter if you pair him up with Finn. So he brings all these interesting dynamics to deck building, and so I feel like you're, from a fundamental level, coming in with like a really strong, solid strategy, and I love deck theory, and they bring a ton of deck theory with them.
Yeah, I agree on that. Both of them are really build around cards, right? Like, if you, especially Poe. Poe is like the most build around guy in the game. You're like, all right, I don't have a lot of resources in this deck, but I don't care. I'm still playing 5-cost upgrades and 4-cost supports. That's totally fine. I need him in here so I can resolve his special and go to town.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you're not playing those cards in the deck because you expect to play them. You're putting them in because with Poe they do like 4 or 5 damage.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of tricks now that we've seen more and more cards. You've got stuff like the data pad that'll use his special. You have the battlefield you can grab that will activate his special. You've got cunning, which can activate his special. So it's like there's all these ways now to activate Poe's special. It's not just simply rolling Poe's die or trying to manipulate Poe's die. There's just tons of ways to be able to make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like a huge combo player. So like in Magic the Gathering, I'd be known as like the Johnny.
Yep.
So like I would just be like all about trying to get my deck to work together. And I think in like Game of Thrones, you guys had a term for it too. It was like Shaga, right?
Yeah.
Or is Shaga's different?
Exactly.
Yeah, you'd be all about getting these like different elements together. And when it flows perfectly, it's just like the greatest feeling.
Yeah, and I am not a combo player, though I do love Poe, and I think he's so good actually that I think he goes beyond the Johnny and really, really leans into that Spike territory because he's that good.
Yeah.
But for me, the character that completely embodies this is Darth Vader. Darth Vader is just a beast. His die is insane. 2 damage, 3 damage. Mm-hmm. Oh, you were saving resources? 2 of them gone. Then on top of that, his ability gives you this control over the game where you just activate him and they have to discard a card. And as you play the game more and more, you realize how critical it is to have cards in your hand. You know, it's options, it's chances to re-roll, it's opportunities to play the cards you need to be playing. Having to discard one of your 5 near the beginning of your turn, or if they're kind of clever and wait for you to play a couple things and then get you stuck in this difficult spot where you don't want to discard any more cards and then they're making you discard. He puts a lot of pressure on you, and if you want to play a mill deck, he puts on the pressure from turn 1. From turn 1, you're like, uh-oh. Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to be milling a lot of cards. Like, if it's an 8-turn game, a 10-turn game, that's 8 to 10 cards that you are just forced to mill. That's a third of your deck. That is a lot over the long term.
Oh, yeah. Vader is really well implemented in terms of his theme in this game, I think, because I've always viewed him as like a very brute force sort of guy. And in this game, he goes beyond just doing pressure in terms of damage. He puts pressure in terms of like your options as well. He makes you feel like you don't have as many options as you should. He sort of backs you into a corner and then gets you where he wants you from there.
Yeah. He's the problem I have with him, or had with him, I should say, is his cost. He is really expensive. And when I first saw him, I thought, you know, that cost us too much. Like, I love Darth Vader. Don't get me wrong. I'll play Darth Vader for fun, even if he's 30 costs and terrible. I just love Darth Vader that much. But he's pretty close. 21 for Elite is a lot. But thankfully, we found a really good deck pairing him with the Tusken Raider, which you would think would just be awful. And Travis, have you found the Tusken Raider to be awful?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah,
the Tusken Raider is surprisingly beastly.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess we might as well talk about him since we've brought him up. Okay.
I think the highlight of the card is definitely his character ability, which is after you activate him, you may discard a card from your hand to resolve one of his character upgrade dice immediately, which is such a big deal in this game.
Yeah, it's one of the things you're going to find more and more that re-rolling is a thing. right? People will be re-rolling your dice or plucking them off regularly. It's just how the game is played. And if any card you have in your deck that says either take an extra action so that you can roll something and resolve it, or like the Raider has it built into him, take another action, that just breaks the rules of the game that we were talking about. That's so cool. I do something, you can react to it. Well, the Tusken Raider says, no, 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 you cannot react to me. I somehow got a mind probe on me. I roll my die, I resolve my special, 5 damage, baby, right out of the gate. And you're just looking at it going, what just happened? A Tusken Raider mind probed me for 5? What?
And for some of you at home, you might be wondering how a Tusken Raider got a mind probe on him, and we'll get into that, trust me.
Yeah. The old holocron. All right. So let's talk about what's a really, really important topic, I think, for this game, and that's RNG, or if you don't know what that means, it basically means the randomness within the game. And like Travis said, when he first saw the game, and I had this similar reaction, okay, wait, let's stop for a second. So you're telling me this game has the randomness of a card game, plus the randomness of dice? Are you a madman? Why don't we just randomly declare a winner before the game and go from there? That seemed to be how a game like this would play out. Have you found the randomness to be completely overwhelming, Travis?
I found quite the opposite. I found that usually the randomness is usually something that I go with every turn, rather than something that I feel is stopping me from doing what I want every turn. And there's tons of ways that you can influence the way the dice work, or tons of ways that you can influence how your opponent's dice are working within the game in order to create yourself a favorable board situation and make your opponent have to react to you rather than the other way around. And this sort of flips throughout the game.
Yeah, I know this is very anecdotal, but I would say I've played over 100 games, and if anyone knows me at all, when something terrible happens to me that's random, it sticks in my craw and I can't shake it. There's only been about 3 games where this has happened. And that's pretty remarkable. If you think about most card games, I'll say Game of Thrones 2.0, for example. I'd say about 20% of the games are decided on randomness. If one person flops Tywin, who's the best first turn card in the game, and sticks him, they probably win. And that happens, a much higher amount than 3% of the time. So I've been really impressed. Like Travis said, what's really important to remember about this game is, the initial die roll can be great. Like if you roll 9 damage out of your first roll, that can be pretty devastating. But there's plenty of cards that can re-roll all of your opponent's dice, or do any number of things to your opponent's dice. It's very unlikely that whatever your first roll is determines the turn and stays there the whole time. That just doesn't happen in that many turns. It'll happen sort of late game sometimes when people have exhausted their mitigation options, and it gets to that moment where you're like, oh man, if he god rolls me, I could be in trouble here. But that normally doesn't happen.
Oh, I agree for sure. And just like the amount of just like baseline ways you can influence your dice just by discarding a card to reroll any number of your dice is a really interesting mechanic as well, because you have cards in this game and you probably won't be able to play all of them. So you choose which cards you think will benefit you the most and which cards are more like reroll fodder. And then you have like this ability to give yourself extra chances to get what you need going.
Yeah, I totally agree. Being able to re-roll dice is such an amazing mechanic. And the other thing that I learned from Dice Masters is that you need to have flexible plans anyway, right? Like your plan can't be, here's my plan, man. I'm going to roll my dice. They're all going to be max damage every turn. And then I'm going to kill their dude. And it's going to be awesome, right? Like that can be your primary plan, but you need to have a plan for the other sides of the dice, right? Like, if you roll resources, you probably should be kind of happy. You're like, okay, cool. I rolled resources. I'll put more upgrades out. I rolled a disrupt side instead of a damage side. Is that good? Maybe that's actually better right here to take my opponent's die, or take my opponent's resource, rather than trying to reroll into more damage. And that's where we were talking about the depth of the game comes in. If you can have a primary plan, a backup plan, even a tertiary plan every single turn, that's going to give you that flexibility to really be able to react to the situation. Now, the people who are going to claim it's all RNG are the people who build these like super simple aggro decks and get frustrated when they keep re-rolling and don't hit their 3 damage every turn.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's like going off what you said there. I definitely think this is a game where like you should at least heavily consider going with what the dice give you and not trying to get a specific result every turn. So like if you roll 2 resources, think like, all right, how can I use 2 extra resources this turn? And sometimes you won't be able to, and that's when you should consider re-rolling instead of just like hardlining just for damage.
Yeah, and even that, it's chess, right? It's being able to think multiple moves ahead. All right, I've seen 15 cards in my deck. I have 15 left. I have a Falcon coming. If I dump my whole hand here, there is a 1 in 3 chance I get the Falcon. So if I resolve to get these 2 resources, and then I get 2 more at the beginning of next turn, all I have to do is pick up 1 more and I can play the Falcon, which would be amazing. And so you really need to be thinking about your dice in that way as well. It's not just simply, I rolled some dice, how do I use them? But thinking about the game in a big picture setting as well. That's when you really see the depth of the game and understand how RNG is not affecting the game nearly as much as you might have thought it was.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so I think we're in agreement. Obviously, it's a card game. It's going to have RNG, but I'm almost ready to make a statement that this is one of the lower RNG games I've played. Like, it feels lower than Game of Thrones 2.0. It feels way lower than the Star Wars LCG. It's not as low as chess, but that's a good thing. I don't think anyone wants it to be chess. How about you? How does it compare to Conquest? I never got really deep into Conquest. I only played, a slightly competitive level.
All right, so with Conquest, I always like to say that your deck, it doesn't matter so much what you draw, but how you use it, because Conquest had that extended board state to it, where you have to decide where you're putting your cards, and you're not just putting stuff into one communal board state. It's like effectively playing over 5. So Destiny feels very similar to me, because it's more about how you use your dice, when you use your dice, how you're interacting with your opponent, which is another very awesome part about Conquest, is that it was this similar I take 1 move, then you take 1 move kind of system. I don't feel Destiny has quite as low of an RNG as Conquest, but it's definitely way down there in terms of the games I've played, definitely compared to A Game of Thrones 2.0 and 1.0. Netrunner, Magic the Gathering especially. So if you're coming in from like one of those other games and you're worried about the random aspect, I just encourage you to give Destiny a try and see for yourself just how much you can actually control the flow of the game compared to those other games where you might be dependent on seeing a specific card.
Yep, I'm going to have to agree with most of what you said there. So let's move on then. Most of the cards have been spoiled now, and people on Tabletop Simulator have been going crazy with this because it's a new thing, right? And so people have been trying out a lot of decks, and I feel like the meta's starting to take shape a bit. I mean, I know some people are going to be really angry, like, what are you talking about? The game isn't even released! The meta cannot be taking shape! But what I mean by that is good decks are popping up. I'm not saying which deck dominates the meta, this kind of thing, or which deck people are going to use globally, but there are clearly archetypes now that are jumping out in character combinations as being really, really strong. So let's start over on the villain side. What do you consider to be, not the strongest, because that's a really hard judgment to make right now, but what is, say, a really strong archetype that you're seeing?
I mean, we mentioned it earlier. I think we definitely need to talk about Vader Raider. Yeah. The two die Elite Vader with 1 Tusken Raider, bringing in the yellow cards and the yellow die to assist Vader, has definitely been a real showstopper on Tabletop Simulator. Yeah,
I agree. And the card that really, or one of the cards that really powers this, is the Sith Holocron. And the reason it's so, I mean, the Sith Holocron is always strong. It gives you a huge resource surge, basically. Once you roll the special, you get to sub it out for, a 3, a 4, a 2 cost item. And then it goes back in your hand, and you just immediately replay it on a different character and hope to roll it on them as well and get another one. I had a game the other day where over the first 2 turns, the person got, 8, 11, 13 free resources off of a holocron. Spoiler alert, I got whooped. So the card is really strong, and when you can put it on the Raider with Mind Probe, I already mentioned this, it does this insane combo where if you take the battlefield and you go first, and you roll your Raider with the Mind Probe and you hit the special, there's nothing they can do. They can't discard cards to resolve the special that says, based on how many cards in your opponent's hand do that much damage. They've got 5 cards. Heck, maybe they have 6 if they're playing the Emperor's Throne Room. It's just completely brutal.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost disgusting.
Yeah,
it's a very strong combo.
It puts your opponent in this really awkward spot of, who do I try to kill? Vader and his ridiculous dice that could very easily roll 6 a turn and is milling me also. Or do I kill this pathetic little Tusken Raider who's mind probing me every turn?
Yeah, you always want to, I find that it's a little best to go after the Raider first, just because then, it removes a die very easily, because the Raider only has, I believe, 9 HP? Yes.
Yeah.
No, 8 HP.
Yeah, 8.
And, but then, you remove that ability for your opponent to immediately resolve some sort of die effect off of activating the Raider, especially from a lot of the force power upgrades, because those, especially on the dark side, have proven to be very strong, in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got to agree with you, but it's so difficult to kill a Tusken Raider with Vader staring you down, especially if they put, a lightsaber on him and, a force throw or a mind probe and a force choke, and you're just looking at that and going, I mean, what am I supposed to do here? So I'm really killing the Tusken Raider. Then I got to come over to Vader, who has 13 health. There are multiple shield cards that are probably on Vader by now. Vader probably is up to 15 health, and he's loaded up with awesome attachments. I mean, how am I supposed to do this?
I mean, that's part of what makes it such a very powerful deck. It's very difficult to do what you want. It's very difficult to decide how to go forward. It sort of pins you into a corner, and you kind of want to cry because you're just taking so much damage and you're running out of options, and no one on the enemy team seems to be dying.
Yeah, and it's a fun deck too because, like we talked about being flexible, Vader only has 2 damage sides. They're real strong, but there's only 2 of them. And so you really have to be, thinking about, is this a turn where I really need to push damage? That guy's almost dead, or should I control this turn? Should I just take his 2 resources and move on, or maybe shield up because that's what I rolled? And so I really like the flexibility where you're not just I'm rolling damage or I'm dying. Jango Fett decks are usually I roll damage or I die, and I don't really enjoy that kind of style of play.
No, I definitely agree with that on Jango. I haven't really had him click with me as much as some other people who seem to have really liked him, and that's cool because everyone seems to have this character identity of their favorite characters from the movie, as well as their favorite game effects and their style of play in this sort of game.
Yeah. All right, so Vader Raider, really strong. Be ready for it. It's going to be a thing. Another deck that I like quite a bit and that I wrote or I made a video about is Grievous Dooku. This deck is fascinating because Grievous's die is insane amount of damage. You thought Vader's die had a lot of damage with a 2 and a 3? Throw in another 2 and now you're looking at Grievous. This dude is a beast.
I mean, half of his dice show damage. 2 of them show 2 damage, and 1 of them shows 3 damage for a resource. And it means, consistently, Grievous is throwing about 3 damage at you a turn. And he could potentially be throwing up to 6 just baseline, ignoring, upgrades that you're typically going to throw on him. He's definitely, the hallmark aggressive character in this game to me. Yeah,
I think his deck is the deck where you have to say, does my deck just auto lose to Grievous? I've got this cool combo deck, or I have this great late game mill deck, and you're like, hold on. Does Grievous just eat it? Do I just die in 4 turns? I feel like he's kind of the check on the meta.
Yeah, I think he definitely helps put the slower decks in a bit of check, because before Grievous, there was kind of this thing where you had to play a lot of upgrades in order to sort of do a lot of damage, but Grievous just kind of brings it right out. He comes out swinging, and it can put a lot of pressure on really quickly. And as you mentioned, Grievous Dooku is a really awesome combination because Grievous puts out a lot of pressure innately and gets even more with upgrades. And Dooku is just a really hard to kill character with a lot of controlling effects. So what you end up doing here is you end up not really doing a lot with Grievous early on. And then Dooku is just controlling your opponent and limiting their options while Grievous is just wailing at them, and it creates this really cool tempo-style deck.
Yeah, and there's this really awesome combo you can do where there's a card called Personal Escort that can give somebody Guardian. And what Guardian says is when you exhaust the character, you get to take a die off the field of your opponents and take that damage on that person. So let's say your opponent has seen Grievous start whooping them, and they're like, oh, this is not working. Grievous is going to die. You better roll a lot of damage because Dooku's just going to exhaust. He'll take the damage on himself. Let's say it's 2. He'll say, you know what? I'll discard a card to only take 1. Oh, and by the way, I have this shield card on me generating a shield every turn, so it's actually 0. So, sorry, that 2 you rolled is not only not going to Grievous, it's going nowhere. It just dissipated.
Yeah, and combine that with the other dice controlling effects you get in Immobilize, Force Choke, Force Throw, use the Force, and suddenly you've got like the ability to just say like your opponent doesn't get to have any dice this turn. And that is a really powerful thing in this game.
Yeah, and a card that I've really come around to that at first I didn't love is No Mercy. My particular Grievous Dooku deck is down to about 2 red cards, 28 blue cards, because No Mercy is so bonkers. So if you roll the 3 side with Grievous, and then play No Mercy, and you have 4 other blue cards, you are doing 7 damage in a swing. You're probably killing whatever character it is that is bothering you. Like, you've already hit him once with Grievous, and this is the finishing blow. Out of nowhere, right? If your opponent has a dude at 3 that has 10 health innately and has 7 left, they're not thinking, oh god, I need to shield up, and I need to do whatever I can to keep this guy alive. They're still in the, like, it's cool. It's cool. Even a god roll from Grievous, I'm fine. And then you're like, you're not. No Mercy. Boosh! There is no mercy here. Your guy's dead.
Oh, yeah. And No Mercy is a very powerful effect I'm trying to fit in more of my dark side decks, simply because they tend to run a lot of blue cards. And sometimes you don't need that many. And surprise 4 extra damage from your hand is a big deal. It can mean winning the game immediately.
For me, No Mercy is such a difficult card. I hate the fact that it decimates your hand. It takes away all your options for that turn. It mills you very quickly, and what I found is my play style oftentimes leads me to the end of games. And it's usually not worth it to me to have done 4 more damage to get myself to a bad spot in the late game. I'd rather be playing upgrades. I'd rather be controlling the board. But with Grievous, I feel like he violates that principle. And his principle is, I will kill you now. There is no late game. You are dying now.
I agree that it definitely works with Grievous, but I think with No Mercy, I think it's more of a get there card than a play if you have it card. It's a card you play when the situation arises that you can kill an enemy character when it matters. So like if they've got a fully beefed up Rey, and she just rolled all her dice, and you've only got 2 damage and you need like 5 to kill her, No Mercy is then there to save your bacon and take her out of the game.
Yeah,
and that's a huge
definitely
deal.
Can agree with that. And with the fact that you can discard for rerolls, it makes cards like that are not universally good fine in this game. You're like, okay, this particular matchup's going to be a control late game matchup. That's fine. I can toss No Mercy for a reroll. It's no big deal.
Yeah, exactly. Everything can be used to reroll your dice, and there's probably a situation about once a turn where you're going to want to reroll your dice.
Yeah, and you know what we didn't even mention? We didn't even mention Grievous's insane effects.
Oh, we didn't?
Whenever someone dies, he takes their upgrade as long as it's not an ability. So if it's equipment, like a lightsaber, a holdout blaster, and what's even crazier is he overwrites redeploy. So like if your opponent played, say, a holdout blaster on Rey, which is a really normal play, and then you kill Rey, they don't get to move that. You take it. And it really shuts down a lot of these decks that want to go wide with a bunch of characters, 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4. They'll focus solely on redeploy weapons, knowing they're going to shift around. It's no big deal if the guy dies. Well, if they die and Grievous is on the board, it's a big deal. Their naked stormtrooper stays naked when his buddy dies. He doesn't even get to borrow his gun.
Yeah, especially. It gets really hard to remember that Grievous has that ability because, like, again, he is just such an aggressive character that you're like, holy crap, he does damage on half of his sides. What do I do?
Yeah. He has the best damage die in the game. Sort of tied with Poe, because Poe also has the 3 damage with 2, a 3 with a resource, and then that special, which I mean, it's usually 3 or more. I mean, my decks are like 1 with
Yeah.
the Force times 2, Mind Probe times 2. Like, there's a plenty of stuff that does 3 or more. But yeah, Grievous, I feel like Grievous Dooku is going to be the deck. It's cheap. My version has no legendaries that I posted online. I'll put a link to it. But it's cheap. It's solid. It should be easy to build. And people are going to build it. I'm telling you. If you have a deck you think is awesome, test it against Grievous, and then you'll find out if it's viable.
Oh yeah, Grievous has been wrecking me.
Yeah, the other day, so a friend of mine is like, I got this new deck. I think it's really good. I was like, okay, cool. And then I load up the Grievous deck because I thought that's what he meant. And he was like, it's not that good. Like, I didn't mean it could beat Grievous. I was like, you just said it was a good deck. My bad. I wanted to give you a real test.
Yeah, I think it's definitely you're going to have to build to beat the Grievous deck, or you at least have to consider the fact that you could be up against Grievous, and that's what makes those cards that typically give you extra effective health very powerful.
Yeah, and I like decks like that. I know some people sometimes get angry about aggro decks, but aggro decks are important because it keeps control decks in check. They can't go so late, right? They have to have some sort of answer for an aggressive deck, and this is a very solid one.
Yeah, it prevents control decks from getting too greedy and keeps the game interesting in the first few turns. Because generally, if I give a bunch of people playing late game decks, it doesn't get to be a game as much until the late game when everyone's set up. But an aggro deck will make that a lot more difficult.
Yeah, before Grievous was spoiled, the key to me was Holocron decks. It was like, who can play the Holocron the earliest and get the most mileage out of it? And Grievous kind of says, that's cool. Your Holocron was great. Your guy's dead, though. Like, I mean, it's cool that you got a turn 1 Mind Probe and didn't get it off, but your guy's dead. So,
yeah,
good job.
Exactly. And I'm glad that there's aggressive decks coming in.
Yeah, I agree. Any other dark side or villain decks that you've looked at and said, ooh, that's a strong one. I like that deck.
I think that there are 2 other deck types we should mention. Both of them kind of have the same theme.
Well, let's start with the first one.
Phasma decks are a big deal because Guardian, as you mentioned, with Personal Escort, is a awesome ability. And
Yes.
Phasma with 2 non-uniques can be a very powerful effect. And then there was also the Phasma Trooper Dooku deck, which was a very hard control deck. I'm not entirely sure how strong that will be in terms of a competitive sense, but it is about as much control as you can jam into a deck currently.
Yeah. Phasma just generally, no matter what you're putting with her, whether it's Phasma Dooku Trooper or Phasma 2 non-uniques, is just really annoying. Especially the 2 non-uniques, because anytime you roll damage, you're not choosing where your own damage goes. The Phasma player gets to decide, and it's a very high skill cap deck where you're always like, well, I'd really like to activate my Stormtrooper to shoot, but is he going to re-roll that die there that's resources? I don't think he needs more resources. I think he's going to re-roll for damage, and I got to be able to Guardian it when he does, and it lets you feel like you have so many options and choices at your disposal, and it just feels like you're in control of the game. No matter what they do, you're like, that was great and all, but let me show you this trick that I had up my sleeve.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you combine, if you do Phasma 2 non-uniques, one of them can be a Night Sister, and that brings you blue cards to the Phasma deck, which gives you that much more control options. So red and blue on the dark side definitely brings you, I think, the most control in the game.
I'll dispute you a little on that. I think yellow heroes is a ton of control also.
It's pretty good too.
But yeah, we'll stick with villains here.
Red, blue.
And I agree. Phasma's so good. Unfortunately, she's legendary, but I will say I'm pretty sure she's a 1-die character.
I am almost certain she is. You don't want to spend any extra points on her because you want to have non-unique guys with her,
right?
To get the best out of her ability.
Her dice are okay. They're not bad, but they're not just wow you kind of dice. So I feel like the what makes her great is her ability to have Guardian over either several guys or one guy and another guy taking advantage of it. Like you were saying, what made the Phasma Dooku deck so amazing is that it was impossible to kill them all. It's so much health. Phasma has 11, Dooku has 10, but Dooku really has 18 with his ability. And then you have, say, a trooper with him for another 7. That's 36 health you're chewing through before shields. That's insane.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I find like your average deck might have like 20 to 25 health, and then like if you can get above that, generally, it's going to be really, that's a lot of health in this game.
Yeah, it's just hard to chew through it all. I was playing last night with the Grievous deck against the Phasma deck. I killed the Stormtrooper almost instantly. I was like, yep, I got this. No, actually, the Night Sister. Then I moved over to the Stormtrooper. Killed her pretty quick. But by that point, Phasma was loaded. Like, she had 3 upgrades on her, was rolling like a truck, and I couldn't finish her off. She had 3 shields as well, and so it was like a 14 health character, loaded up. Grievous was dead now, and it was just like Dooku kind of loaded up against load up Phasma, and I got rocked. And I was kind of shocked. I thought I had the game easily won, but it was just so much health, and it took me so long to chew through it all. I couldn't get it done.
Yeah, the Phasma decks tend to definitely grind you out slowly. They're willing to lose a couple of characters to get there, but they're definitely gonna like eventually grind you out enough that they'll come into the case where they have the better board state.
Yeah, and so for me that fits my playstyle very well. But if you're playing a Phasma deck, oftentimes you're going late, and that's where cards like No Mercy, you're like, oh boy, do I want to discard 4 here? I might lose on Mill, my own, just milling myself to death with Dooku or something.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like cards like No Mercy are a big deal against those Phasma decks, where if you can land a blow on Phasma, like after both their Guardians are used up, or if they're doing the Phasma Dooku and they've already used their Guardian, a No Mercy that picks out Phasma or Dooku in that case is everything, because that deck is all about recovering from low HP and just keeping their characters alive on the fringe.
Yeah, and then worst part, you finally have Phasma pretty close to dead, and then they play Endless Ranks and bring back the Stormtrooper for another 7 health.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh boy! All right, well, we're gonna move on.
It's a deck.
So those are the villain decks we've seen so far. We're not making a claim that these are the villain decks. There will be no more villain decks. There's still 15 cards left to be spoiled. We're still very early in the experimentation process. There will be more decks. These decks may not be as strong as we think they are, but these are some great starting places for building really cool decks. So let's turn to the hero side now. Where do you want to start?
I'm going to start with Han Rey, which I'm sure you've guessed by now is sort of like my favorite hero deck, is the old Han Rey special. This deck is a ton of shields and a ton of upgrades and fully abusing Rey's ability to give yourself a ton of actions in order to just shoot the crap out of the other guy and kill his characters very quickly.
Let's focus there for a moment. So Rey looks kind of unassuming. So she's only innocent. 10 health. Her dice are kind of garbagey, to be honest. And you're looking at her and you're like, I mean, she's in the starter set. That's cool. I'm never going to play with her. Trust me, you will be playing with her a lot. First of all, this cost, Travis. What the heck are they thinking with this cost?
For sure. I have definitely mentioned more than a couple of times, I feel like she should be 10-14. It's not her die that makes her a good character. It's her ability. So
let's think about 12. 12 means you can be Elite Rey with stuff like Elite Han, who's amazing, Elite Poe, who's amazing. There are no other elites, and this is especially the case on the dark side. You just can't pair amazing elites with another elite. It's just not possible because there isn't a cheap enough character. Kylo is the closest at 10-13. But Rey, it feels like she breaks the cost boundary. And like you said, let's look at her ability. After you play an upgrade on this character, you may take one additional action. You might be thinking, all right, I mean, that's cool. So I get a little bit of, tempo. I play some weapon. I play a lightsaber on Rey, and then I get to roll it. Okay, that's fine. That's not that great. My opponent can still disrupt it. But Travis, give me one way to exploit this possibly broken mechanic.
So here's where Rey gets a little silly. So you have 2 cards if you're running Han Rey that are ambush attachments. And ambush in this game gives you an extra action after you put that card into play. This is cumulative with Rey's ability, so you'll get 2 actions after equipping Rey with one of these ambush effects. So you've got the Holdout Blaster, which costs 2, and is an ambush, and it gives you a pretty decent weapon, and it's also a redeploy. So if your character happens to die it'll redeploy over. And then you've got the Han Solo special and the DL-44 heavy blaster pistol, which is also ambush and does something when it comes into play in that it forces your opponent to choose and remove a die. And at the right moment, that could be all of the world.
Yeah.
Now, you just gain 2 actions after ambushing one of these in onto Rey. And, they're range damage. They're all right. But Rey doesn't really... I like to then immediately replace those upgrades, because you can replace an upgrade in this game by discarding an old upgrade and discounting your new upgrade by that old upgrade's cost.
Yeah, let's stop for a second, though, and back up.
Yeah.
So what he's saying, though, is you get 2 additional actions. You don't have to roll Rey now, right? You've put a weapon on Rey. You need to get it out of your head that, like, I put a weapon on Rey, now I roll Rey. No. You have 2 actions. You can roll Han Solo with his 2 jetpacks, and then when he gets his God roll and goes, like, 2 damage, +2 from a jetpack, +3, you immediately resolve that before they can do anything, just smashing somebody for 7 and devastating them.
Yeah, and that tends to be how I like to play the deck, is I use Rey to roll Han, or I will roll Han first if he's already got his upgrades and I don't think I'm slapping more on him. And then on my second turn, I'll use this double action on Rey.
Yeah. To
either like re-roll some of Han's dice and then immediately resolve them, or to get Rey herself out there and resolve all of my dice, or as many as I can. Yeah. And because her ability says any time you play an upgrade, you can replace her upgrades basically as a free action.
Yeah.
So you can just like play the DL-44 to get that 2 actions, and then immediately replace it with like 1 with the Force for 1 resource more, or with a Force throw, and then you could roll Rey and get your Force throw die and throw your opponent's damage back at them. And
then what makes it even stronger, and to me kind of strays into the busted territory, is you play the Starship Graveyard, which says when you claim the battlefield, put something on the top of your deck. So you do what Travis is talking about. You play your holdout blaster, then you overwrite your holdout blaster. Well, where does that go? It goes to the discard pile. You are getting extra actions, so you're ending your turn faster. You then claim the battlefield. You put it back on top. What do you do next turn? Whoop! Holdout blaster! Right back on Rey. You can do this every single turn if you keep overwriting it for free or for maybe 1 more resource. It's just, that's the part that I found can be completely ridiculous. I've had games where I've just looped it like 6 times. It's just like, okay, Han resolve, Han resolve, Han resolve, Han resolve, and that wins the game. There's really no way for them to overcome that unless you're just rolling terrible rolls with Han.
Yeah, the game is sort of built around this fundamental idea that you have to roll your dice, and then your opponent gets to respond before you resolve them. And the Rey Han deck sort of breaks that by just saying, no, I get to resolve my dice when I want to, because I equip Rey with a 2-cost upgrade I'm recurring every turn before I rolled my dice. So it gets pretty silly, I think.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun.
It's always dangerous when you have cards and effects that break the rules, right? The rules are designed for a reason. It's what keeps the game in check. And when you have a card like Rey that breaks the rules, it's scary. And when she costs nothing, it's way, way scarier.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely wish like Rey was like if not 9/12, I wish she was like 9/13, so that you couldn't put her with like an elite Han or an elite Poe and be as effective.
And I'm sure they tested that very carefully and decided that was what they wanted to have happen. So that's what's kind of interesting about that. You know, the play testers are looking at all the character pairings very carefully. So this is something they tested and said, we like this. This is where we want it to be.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm gonna put faith in the unknown cards that we have and maybe future sets. But I think Rey is definitely like one of the biggest strengths of the light side when paired with a powerful character like Han or Poe.
Yeah, me too. A deck that I've been playing more and more that I think is good, it's hard to say right now because it's so janky, is the Qui-Gon Shields deck. And so basically the way this works is you just play piles and piles and piles, endless numbers of cards that give you shields repeatedly. Not just events that give you a shield or two, but you play upgrades that give you shields. And so when you get these on your guy and then you're rolling Qui-Gon, you're just getting more and more and more shields over and over, and it gets to this point where you're just doing 3 damage a turn with Qui-Gon shields. You don't even have to roll any damage size, and your guys can't take damage because they're so shielded up. And it gets to this point where it's very difficult, and then there's a card, Riposte, which lets you discard your shields to do that much damage to somebody, so it's like a burn effect. You just whoop, hit them for 3, and then your next action, I'll resolve this die that gives me 3 shields back. And your opponent's just looking at you going, what? How am I supposed to beat this? It's completely degenerate. We're not even playing the game. You're just doing crazy shield things. Have you had a lot of experience with this, Travis?
I have not yet played it, but I have played against it once or twice, and I do think that it's definitely an up-and-comer deck that could be quite strong. It has a lot of similarities with my Hanrei deck, where I run Riposte as well, because Han tends to build up to 3 shields, and sometimes your opponent ignores them, and Riposte will help you punish that a bit more.
Yeah.
And it sort of functions in the same way as No Mercy, because you can trade a resource that you have that you might not need, such as, like, with No Mercy it's cards, with Riposte it's shields, and you turn it into burst damage. And the cool thing about Riposte especially is you can do it without having rolled any dice. If you have shields going into the next turn, you can immediately play it and just discard those shields and kill off an opponent's character that's low HP before they have an opportunity to react or roll dice and interact with your dice.
Yep.
So I think it's a very powerful card if you're generating a lot of shields, which the Qui-Gon deck tends to do because he has 2 dice with shields on it.
Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of people who like to play Elite Qui-Gon, Elite Rey, which is good. You get a lot of just shields on Qui-Gon's dice anyway. Rey's great, as we talked about. But for me, I've been playing a crazy deck. It's 2 hired guns plus Qui-Gon. So you're getting endless cash. I don't resolve the damage side from the hired guns. I'm rerolling for the cash. And it's just money, money, money. And then I can play stuff like 2 diplomatic immunities and the upgrade that costs 3 that rolls you 3 shields. So I'm rolling like 8 shields a turn by turn 3. And the opponent's just like, what? How am I supposed to handle that? Like, I've got cards to remove all your shields, but it's an event. I have 2 copies of it in my deck, and you are repeatedly rolling 8 a turn. I don't see how I combat that.
That's insane. That sounds like a lot of fun. I might have to steal that idea from you and give that a whirl.
Don't be stealing my ideas, man.
That's how I roll. I'll steal all the good ideas.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about the deck. I don't know that it's going to be a tippity-top deck, but I can assure you it's a lot of fun, and it's a solid deck, if nothing else.
Oh yeah, it sounds like a really fun deck. I think like the check on it is that it is resource reliant, and so a savvy opponent might make better use of disruption dice against you to prevent you from playing those big upgrades.
Yeah, and if you notice, none of the decks we've talked about are choke, disrupt, resource prevention decks, and I think there's definitely a deck out there that's going to be like that. I'm trying to figure out how exactly to work it right now. With there are 2 cards that remove all of your opponent's resources. With I can't remember the names of them actually, but there's a red one and a blue one.
Occupation and
all something.
No, it's you're talking about the blue one, right? The Given to Despair or something like that.
I don't remember what the name is.
Fallen to Despair? Yeah,
something like that. Yeah, but it's you basically from turn 1, as long as you claim the battlefield off of that initial roll, which you're going to be able to like 75% of the time, because you're going to win about half the time, which you will claim it, and the other half the time your opponent's going to be like, I want the shields, dude. I don't care about the battlefield. And so from turn 1, if you hard mulligan for one of 4 cards, there's a good chance you're going to have it, and you should be able to strip their resources like every single turn for the first couple turns while you're doing holocron and setting stuff up. Maybe you sneak a local garrison in there. Now they're only getting 1 per turn. I think it's a real thing. I have no idea what the end game build is going to be. I feel like these last 17 cards we're waiting for, they may push this into a real deck. I kind of hope not, Travis, because these types of decks tend to be very NPE or negative player experience. The last thing you want is a new player like, all right, I got my Rey Luke deck. I can't wait. And every single turn you take all their money, and they're like, this game is stupid. I rolled Luke, I did not roll his damage, and I never got to buy anything. I don't even know what the point of this game is.
Yeah, for sure. And coming from Conquest especially, where a choke deck was a big deal in the meta for most of the game, I do think it definitely affected new players coming in. I do think it's interesting. I don't know if there will ever be a strict hard choke deck, because you do have to still reach a victory condition somehow. You still have to kill the opponent's characters. Yeah. I think it'll come into play in those decks that are trying to slow your opponent down so that they can build up for a really strong late game scenario where they have like 4-cost upgrades on all their characters, and then they're just rolling so much damage every turn.
Either that or mill. Like, if you could make this
mill.
work with Vader, so that he's milling every turn, he just activates, they're losing cards, it could work. But the problem with that is, they're not playing cards because they don't have resources, so it's really hard to mill somebody who can't actually play any cards.
Yeah, and you know, that's the nice thing about Abandon All Hope, which is the name of the card we were thinking
There
of
we
earlier.
go. Got it.
Abandon All Hope is that if you can get them to maybe like use it to discard cards early and then switch into that resource denial, so like if you can get them to like Abandon All Hope, like I don't want to lose all my like 5 resources.
Yeah.
And then like you can just play Occupation right afterwards and make them lose their resources anyway.
Yep.
Then you might be able to do stuff like that. That gets into a little bit of a janky territory, but I think Resource Choke definitely is about slowing the opponent down, and Mill is all about. It is absolutely the latest the game can go.
Exactly.
Is making your opponent run out of cards.
So we'll see if it's a real deck. I'm hoping it's like a tier 2 deck, that it's reasonable, it's effective, a really good player can still win with it, but I'm really hopeful that it won't be the best deck in the meta and make everyone hate the game.
I don't think it will be, thank goodness.
Alright, I think the last, or I shouldn't say the last, but another really good hero deck, we've already talked about this, is Poe Dameron. I tend to think Poe Ray is the best version, just because then you get 2 elite characters. Poe is insane.
Oh, Poe is the most insane elite character outside of maybe Vader, I think. Just because you're when you play Poe on the table and he has 2 dice and you're playing with like the Emperor's Throne Room, your opponent immediately has to go, I have to stop Poe with every fiber of my being.
Yep.
Because if Poe's ability goes off, it's a wild card. It could be as innocent as 2 damage, but it could be as bad as 4 or 5. Sometimes, like if they have like Finn and they're using the ATST, and it's something you just can't leave unchecked. You have to always like play around it or play against it and stop it as best you can. And what makes Poe really good is that he's also one of the tankier characters out there because he's got that extra 2 HP compared to like the standard 10 that most characters have.
For sure. And when you compare him with Ray, I mean, when you pair him with Ray, you get 4 cards in your deck that are going to let you roll Poe's special and then resolve it without your opponent being able to do anything. You've got your Hit and Run, which is an event that lets you exhaust a red character and then take another action because it's ambush. And then you have Ray, where you can put the Holdout Blaster on her, get 2 actions, roll Poe. And so it puts your opponent in just terrible spots where it's like, okay, he's got a 1 in 3 chance of rolling a special. And if he rolls it, that could be 5, 4, 3 damage that I can't do anything about. And it's difficult. It's really frustrating as the opponent. It's a little bit frustrating as the player as well, because if you whiff that every time, it's more important than most decks, right? Most decks I talk about, it's low RNG, you work with what you get. Well, Poe's trying to roll a special. Let's just be honest, right? Poe's like, oh, I rolled a resource? No, I'm not here to roll resources. I'm Poe freaking Dameron. I'm here to roll specials.
Yeah, he feels a lot like Grievous, I think, in that like with those 2 characters, you have damage on 3 dice, and that's what you're bringing them to your team for, is the damage. You're not bringing them for the cute little disrupt 1 or the gain a resource. And if you're not rolling damage, you notice it a lot more, because in your mind you're thinking, man, Poe should be doing like 7 damage a turn. Why is he only doing 2? Like,
I totally agree. I love the Grievous deck, but I don't like playing it because it's that feeling of, I whiffed 4 straight rolls and got no damage. Normally, you're just kind of like, that's fine. I knew that could happen. I have backup plans. That's the whole point of this game. But when you're playing someone like Grievous or Poe, and you miss 4 times in a row, it really haunts you. Because you're like, that's what this deck does! Like, its backup plan is to help it get more damage and to roll its damage better. And I've enacted all those, and I still can't roll the damage! Those drive me crazy.
I will say that for Poe, I don't feel as bad if I don't roll the special, if I roll some of his damage, because his damage dice are really good too. Like,
but when
2
you
damage
roll
and 3 damage for resource.
his resource every time, you feel bad. You feel bad.
Yeah, especially because, like, you know, you're just cutting cards from your hand. You're not necessarily looking to play them unless they're vehicles. But in the Poe Ray deck, which I agree is probably one of the better versions of the deck, you don't have many vehicles to go with. You basically just have black 1, and some people don't like black 1.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of black 1. And then if you run it with Finn, you only get 1 Poe die. And to me, Poe's a 2 dice dude. Like,
I agree.
if I'm building my whole deck around Poe's special and putting in all these overcosted cards I can't play, I can't only have one of his dice. That sounds ridiculous.
No, that said, I do think we're going to see some cards for that synergize with more vehicles for the light side, because we got like Launch Bay and a couple of other cards. I think that sound like they're going to be dealing with vehicles. So maybe you go one die to get Finn in there and get all these first order vehicles, and then these cards sort of make up for the fact that you're only running one die with Poe.
Yeah, that could be. That'll be really interesting. I hope that does happen because it'll make it feel a little bit more flexible, a little bit farther away from this. Well, I'm all in here. Let's make this happen.
Yeah, I think Poe is like the most explosive deck, but also probably one of the few decks that are really kind of tied to rolling well on Poe.
Yeah.
So he's like explosive, but not consistent. And for some people, that's exactly the style they want.
I agree. So these are the really good decks that we found so far. Again, I feel like we need to make this caveat 18 times. We're not saying we've solved the meta. All we're saying is, here's some great decks out of the gate. I'm sure there'll be many others that are also really, really strong. But this is just a starting place. Having seen the card pool that we have so far, and remembering we're still a couple cards short of the whole thing, does one side pop out to you as being stronger out of the villains and the heroes?
It's tough to say. I think the heroes have a really strong character in Rey, and then like they have two really strong characters that go well with Rey in both Han and Poe. But I want to say, like, the ignoring characters, just looking at the card pool, I really feel like the villain side has a little bit of a stronger card pool in the blue and maybe the red. But definitely the blue for me, because I like Control, and Force Choke and Immobilize are two very powerful controlling cards.
Yeah.
And the hero side is definitely stronger in like the yellow area, where they have like these really awesome events and attachments that they can give. The DL-44 Heavy Blaster is a beast of a card, and it's probably one of my favorites in the game right now.
Yeah, I think the way I've been thinking of it as villains have the stronger aggro decks, heroes have the stronger sort of mid-rangey decks, and then the villains excel more in control. For me personally, I enjoy control most, and then if I just want like to smash somebody, I'll play aggro. I tend to play this sort of mid-rangey deck a little less, because if I'm going later, I would rather be the control player and go all the way late. And so I think that's where I feel like their strengths are. But there was a deck we didn't mention, and that's Light Side Mill. And I think that's going to be a very real deck. And I guess we should segue here. One of the difficulties, I think, with trying to evaluate what's better, light side or dark side, is the villains have all their non-unique cheap guys spoiled. The heroes don't. We're still missing the red trooper and the blue Padawan, and that could make all the difference, right? It's going to open up so many more decks, and I really think there's like a Padme, Trooper, Rey deck where it's all about milling the deck with patience and with Padme's ability and one-cost upgrades. And I really think that deck could feasibly be the late-game deck of all late-game decks. And I'm not positive on that yet. We can't try it yet, but I'm really eager to give it a go.
Yeah, Padme is definitely a character where if you can drag a game out, you can hit her ability like almost every turn, then it starts to add up, and she is definitely going to be like the Mill character. And the thing with Mill right now is like I find that it tends to struggle with just getting that last push. Like it could empty their deck, but then like it just needs to get enough discard to end the game. And you know, if Trooper comes out and the Trooper has a discard die, then Commando Raid could be a big option.
Oh yeah.
And then you just stick in like Commando Raid and then like 28 other control cards to prevent your opponent from doing stuff, and you just let Padme mill the game and then the Trooper end it. And then
I'm not sure I'm going to be with you all on that one. That sounds kind of crazy, but I got some ideas too. I hear what you're saying. I may not agree with the details, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely feel like it's going to be like a really like late game oriented deck that's trying to prevent your opponent from killing its characters before it reaches its win condition.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with Mill in like every game, is it doesn't necessarily play for the board state as much. It just wants to empty your deck. It plays for a different win condition than you are.
And what's really interesting about this game is I feel like any game I've played, I never played Magic seriously, so any game I've ever played, when people are like, I got this mill deck, it's always like, dude, it works like 1 out of every 100 games. But when it does, it's so cool. Whereas this feels like a legit possibility. With only 30 cards in your deck, and you're able to play them all and redraw 5 cards every single turn. If your opponent were to play all of their cards every turn, in 6 turns they have milled themselves. So it's not as late as you might think it is. It changes your opponent's play style a lot. Maybe they don't do any rerolls because they're terrified of your mill, and it kind of puts a check on your opponent that way. I think mill is going to be a very legit strategy. And to be honest, Travis, I'm terrified it's going to be too good. I do not want mill decks to be the main decks.
I definitely agree that I don't want them to be the best deck. I don't want them to be the only deck everyone's playing, because then the game's not as interesting without shooting and lightsabers and combat, because that's a big part of Star Wars. But I do think it's all right for it to be a deck that wins a proportional amount of times, like a decent amount of times, that has a win condition that's hard to pilot and is considered like a viable strategy, but not the best.
Yep. I would love if it was a legit tier 2 deck, right? Like a good player in that player's hands will almost always beat a lesser player, but when 2 great players play, the non-mill deck has the advantage. That would be my dream scenario.
I do agree with that. And, I kind of look forward to, like, the day where, like, there's a regional or something or a big event, and then it's like, did you hear that, like, that regional was won with a mill deck? That's so cool.
Yep.
Like,
but it was that
it would
Travis
just completely
guy.
blow people's expectations. Yeah.
And Travis is so awesome that he could win with anything, but he won with a mill deck.
Yeah, people do say that about me all the time.
I'm sure they do. All right. Let's move away from this then. I feel like this has been a pretty good look at where the meta is today. Again, there's 17 more cards. Who knows? The meta could be completely blown up when they come out. But if you're interested in joining us, grab Tabletop Simulator. It's been a really fun tool. And I got to say, if FFG is listening, this has been a boon for you. I'm telling you. You know how many people have bought boxes off of this? I'll play a person. They're like, I never played Tabletop Simulator. Is this game fun? I'm like, yeah, it's fun. And they're like, yeah, I'm not going to buy it, though. It's collectible. I don't want to play it. And I'm like, oh, that's fine. We'll just play a game. We played 2 games. And they're like, hey, man, I just went on cool stuff and bought 2 boxes. I'm like, what? You said you weren't going to play it. Oh, no, this game's amazing. I'm definitely playing it.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't until I played it on Tabletop Simulator that I was completely sold into buying into this game as well, and immediately looked up all the pre-launch events in my area. I definitely think the Tabletop Simulator has been a huge selling point for the game. And if you're interested in playing, I recommend picking it up. I think it just went on the Humble Bundle store again for, I think, $10.
Nice.
And I also recommend checking out the Knights of Ren Discord channel. You can find it on their podcast page. And tons of people look for games there. Yeah, so sign up, join.
I found it to be the best place to talk live Star Wars Destiny. The Knights of Ren guys hang out there. They're cool guys. They're informed. They draw other informed people into their web. And it's just a great place to talk decks, strategy, rules, find games, whatever you want. Not to mention listen to their great podcast as well. All right, well, let's move on to a topic that I think is always interesting for new games like this. Whenever a new game comes out, cards get spoiled, I look at them, and I make a gut reaction. And I'm often right, but sometimes I'm so wrong, it's unbelievable. And this especially comes from, if you actually know me, my inability to actually read cards. I have this terrible habit of skimming cards, even though they're only like 1 line of text. But a card that I really missed on, Travis, was it's a trap. So I looked at it, and I was like, all right, it's 1 cost. It's so situational. It is only your red dice. I mean, your opponent has to roll the exact thing you need, and then you can turn, 1 or 2 of your dice, that symbol. I've come around to thinking this may be one of the best cards in the game, and is possibly and probably the best finisher in the game. Even more so than No Mercy. I think this is the best finisher in the game.
I completely agree with you. It's a trap, kind of flew under the radar. I saw it as strong simply because it allowed you to set your dice and then immediately resolve them. And again, that's a very powerful effect in this game. If you can get the sides of the die you want, and then you can use them right away without your opponent being able to mess with them. That's a big deal.
Yep.
And I know from personal experience how strong It's a Trap was from you, where I think I was playing the 4 non-unique deck, and then It's a Trap one of my Night Sisters for 7 damage and killed it. And then like the very next turn, I roll my other Night Sister with all of her cool little force upgrades. I roll 1 special, and then you're like, cool, Poe kills you. 8 damage from hand. And I'm like, okay. And that's the game. It's a very powerful effect.
And what's so cool is that it works amazing with Poe. Poe's the best target. But what I realized is it's not just the special. So, like, if you get Poe and 2 weapons on him, and they roll a single range damage, any character on the board is dead. You just turn Poe to the 3 side, you turn a blaster to the +3, you turn another one to the +2, another one to the 2. What's that? 3, 5, 8, 10. And then you just instantly resolve 10. And then they're just looking at you like, what just happened? You can't just kill Grievous in one shot. This is absurd.
Mm-hmm. It's a card that I'm especially looking at if the Rebel Trooper happens to be like a good fit for Han as well. Like say it's like a middle, say it like costs a little more than the other ones, or maybe it costs 6, but I doubt that would happen. Where you can run one with Han and have it be a sidekick for Han, then Han can get in these red ambush cards like It's a Trap and have these red upgrades with like the blaster rifle and do a very similar thing and get a shield off of it. I don't think it's as strong as Poe, but I think it's definitely going to open up new deck building options for Han in the future as well, so long as It's a Trap exists. And if we ever get a red character, that will go well with Han in that regard.
I'm actually terrified for this card for the future. So far from what we've seen, it's fine. There's not a lot of red weapons. Every red weapon they print until this card cycles out, they have to think, oh no, does this take us over the threshold or where It's a Trap is broken? Right now it's good. It's a very good card. But it will be broken if you can just be like, alright, I got 8 red weapons in my deck. I've got 6 of them on characters. If you roll a range damage, I do 14 damage. That's going to be too much.
Oh, speaking of as well, if Rebel Trooper costs like 7 or 8, like a Stormtrooper, and you can run like a Rebel Trooper deck, this card becomes very good.
Oh, that would be
where you can set like 6 to 8 dice to range damage or to specials and just blow someone up. It could be a big deal.
Yep. The cap on it right now is only having 2 red weapons. As long as we stay there, maybe a third, it's fine. But just imagine that deck: 4 troopers, 5 different red weapons, so each one of them has 2 weapons. I mean, that'd be insane. 12 dice. It's
a bit of a setup, but yeah, like imagine like you just had like your 4 red dice from your 4 troopers, and then like 2 or 3 weapons sparsed amongst them. It's 7 dice, and each of them does like an average of 2 damage. That's 14 damage for 1 resource and ambush.
Right. I'll kill both of those guys. Cool, your turn. Like, you can't do that. That would be insane.
Yeah, it's a good card. Definitely watch it.
So is there a card that you missed as badly as I missed on It's a Trap?
Hunker down. 100%
Hunker down. That is a big miss. That card's phenomenal.
Yeah. I looked at this and I'm like, there's a lot of melee damage. So like at best it's like a shield, maybe, if they don't like immediately strike you for melee damage. And then like you told me like how you were playing it, and I gave it a try, and now I'm completely switched. I think the card is amazing.
So let's talk about what Hunker Down is. I don't have the picture here. So Hunker Down is a 0-cost, neutral yellow upgrade that says you just exhaust it, give that character a shield. So literally every turn you're getting a shield from it. And the drawback is if they take melee damage, it gets discarded. But to be very clear, they have to actually take the damage. It says in the rule book that a shield does not count as taking the damage. So if you're able to go like end of the turn, play it on him, this is against the melee deck, exhaust it, get a shield, next turn, exhaust it, get a shield. They can't just do melee damage. They have to roll 3 melee damage to be able to punch through this thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it costs 0, especially on the light side. It's exceptionally good because you can just use it on Rey as basically just for free. Yeah. You can play it and use it right away, or you can play it and use your action to do something else. It doesn't cost you an action to play it, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, it's really good.
If you get that engine going where you have a lot of shields, and then you're just replenishing a shield every turn, and they can't quite punch through and get rid of it.
Yep.
It's devastating.
It's one of the many shield cards that goes in my Qui-Gon deck, where it's just like, okay, cool, boom, there's a damage. I rolled Qui-Gon's die. Boom, there's damage. Here's another event. Here's to take cover. Boom, there's a damage. It's like every card in the deck is a damage, and it just becomes completely overwhelming. And Hunker Down really, really helps with that. And every deck, I think. Like, if I'm building a yellow deck, for me, it goes in every single one as a 2-of. That's just how I roll it these days.
I think that's really close to home. I'm really curious about trying a yellow deck that runs Dooku with it as well, because like Dooku with Hunker Down and Into the Shadows or whatever that blue upgrade is that also gives you a shield if you have none, sounds pretty good. Dooku will legitimately never die.
There is one check for that, though, which I love, which is you can only have 3 upgrades. So I actually had that situation. I had a deck where I had Dooku with Into the Shadows and Hunker Down. He was not dying. There's a problem, though. His die, if you're just one Dooku die, is not much damage, and I have like an Immobilize on him. And I couldn't do anything. The game went forever. It went like 8 turns after our decks were empty, but it was just simply my opponent rolling for damage, and then me claiming the battlefield, which was the remove a character die, if he did roll a damage. And so he would have to roll 2 damage, and then I would shield up. And it was this ridiculous game of me not having any cards to hit him, and him waiting for the God roll. And like 20 turns in, he finally God rolled me and beat me. But it is funny how limiting to 3 upgrades is so key. Dooku would never die if you could have unlimited upgrades. You would go,
I agree,
2 of each of the shield things, and then just set them up with upgrades for days, and it would be totally insane.
Yeah, I definitely think the 3 upgrade thing is definitely a good place for the game to be. And what you bring up there is really curious to me, because I have to wonder if there's ever going to be a state, like a game state, where like it's just kind of unwinnable for either player, and then like neither player wants to discard cards because they'll lose the game by running out of cards. So I have to wonder if there's ever going to be a state where it's like Dooku v Dooku with these upgrades, and then like neither of them has enough damage to punch through the other opponent's shield. Well, how do you resolve that? So
yeah, and that'll happen.
I'm hoping there's like something that happens to maybe help with that.
I'm sure they'll have to have a scenario for that. All right, let's move away from this then. Each week, if I have something, I want to talk about tips and tricks. And this week, it is Rey. We've already been talking about Rey. We've already been talking about extra actions Rey. Well, there's a really interesting trick with the way end-of-turn rules work. So let's say you're playing the Imperial Armory, which says, play an upgrade from your hand, decreasing its cost by 1. Okay, so you play, say, the Holdout Blaster Rifle. You end your turn, you claim the battlefield, your turn is over, all the rest of your actions are passes, and you play from your hand the blaster onto Rey, which gives you, what, Travis?
It gives you an extra action.
It sure does. It actually gives you 2 actions, right? So you have 2 actions now. You actually can resolve them, because the way end-of-turn structure works is, essentially, if you have things that are resolving at the same time. So you have 3 things resolving at the same time. You have the 2 actions from Rey, and then you have the end of turn effect. You get to order them. So what you get to do is say, all right, I claimed the battlefield, so I'm the owner of the battlefield now. That person decides the order. My order is going to be 2 actions, and then the turn ends. So let's say you had 2 more dice that you hadn't resolved yet because you knew you had this trick. You could be like, all right, I'll then do 2 damage to you and take a resource. And your opponent is like, what? What? That doesn't seem right. Or what's the greatest trick you can think of, Travis, that you could do to just melt your opponent's face?
Oh, dude. So you can, like I said before, you can discount upgrades on Rey to get extra actions. So imagine you have 2 Holdout Blasters, not just 1. So you play 1, you get 2 extra actions.
Sure.
And then you, for your second extra action, you take the battlefield and use it to play the other for a single resource. And then using that, you can discount like a DL44 from your hand and get this insane. Basically, you just take your entire turn by taking the battlefield on your first turn. You can take like all of your turns at once and take the battlefield on the first action. Theoretically, this is the dream scenario.
Yeah.
And you need like 4 or 5 resources to do it, but it could happen. And you can take like 6 actions to take the battlefield.
That sounds terrible, because then your opponent gets to take all their actions and all their rerolls and wreck you with you having no recompense. But there is a way to end the turn in its entirety. So you can do all that, and as your last action, pay 3 resources and play, what's the name of the card?
Hyperspace Jump, I believe.
Hyperspace Jump, which says, end the turn. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to take a bunch of actions, take the battlefield, load up 6 more actions, boom, 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 boom. Last action, 3 resources, turns over. And your opponent's going to be like, what? What?
Are you sure you're not a Johnny player, Tiny? Because that just spoke to my inner Johnny so hard.
Yeah.
I was
The
like,
TO
yeah, you need like 6
gonna
resources.
get called over.
But
TO's going to get called over when that happens, and you're going to have to explain how that works.
yeah, and then if your TO doesn't quite keep up the rules, you're gonna have some head scratching going on.
That, I've read the rules. It says I take an action and you take an action. There's no way that can be right. That just cannot be right. There's no way.
But it is.
But
now I'm gonna have to stick in a hyperspace jump in my Han Ray deck just for the off chance I have all these extra resources and can pull that off.
There you go.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
All right. It's time for the quiz. We always have a quiz here on the Smugglers Den, and we're gonna keep doing that for Star Wars Destiny. I have a card for you. I'm trying to remember what it was called.
Oh boy! I tried to
it?
pick
Where is
some relevant cards for this, so we'll see how it goes.
It's weird. I could have sworn I had it here. Hold on. It's no, I can't find it. But the card is what is the name of it? Like Force Misdirection? Is that the name of it?
Oh, Force Misdirection, the one with Luke on the art.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a blue hero 1-cost event that says remove or choose a die you control and remove all opponent's dice sharing a side with it. So you could pick a range die with one range damage, and say your opponent's running a bunch of stormtroopers and they have a bunch of range damage showing it to you. You can just remove them all. So it's a very strong card in the right situation. I think the problem the card's going to have is the right situation doesn't come up that often. But when it does, that card just removes like 4 or 5 dice per 1 resource, and your opponent's like table flipping you.
Yeah, I feel like it's not going to go in any of my decks unless the meta shifts to some very specific deck type. I know what's coming, right? Like, it's like everyone's playing the Han Ray deck, and they're always going to have tons of blaster damage. Then I'm going to be like, okay, maybe now this card becomes really good. Yeah,
exactly. I think in a certain meta where there's like a specific damage type that's really prevalent, and then you can have like one character that shares that damage type, or say special becomes really prevalent, and you can just give up one of your special. You don't actually have to give up the die. Actually, you just have to have the die.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy strong actually. Like I said, I'm not sure it's going to be good, but it's certainly strong.
I think its main weakness is that you have to have the die already set up on the side that you want, and then you have to have your opponent have a sharing side. Similar to It's a Trap, but It's a Trap like makes up for that because of how far you can go with it. Whereas in this case, it's just stopping your opponent from doing stuff, and your opponent kind of has to play into it a little bit for it to become really good.
All right, so what is your quiz for me, sir?
All right, so this is a card I think we should definitely talk about. I want you to tell me about Disarm.
Disarm. Disarm is a really easy one because it is such a meta card. It's a 1-cost yellow neutral, so it goes in everything, and you can get rid of one of your dice that has an amount of damage or amount of melee or range damage. It can be a plus, by the way, and whatever that number is, you can get rid of one of your opponent's upgrades that is, I believe it's only equipment upgrades, that is that amount or less. So if you can roll, just 1 damage and your opponent has a holocron, you can disarm that holocron and discard it. We're really happy to see this card get spoiled because it's like, okay, holocron was scary. This is a hard direct counter to holocron, and just the idea of all I have to do to win is load up upgrades and then crush your face in. This is a great counter to that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a really strong meta call right now because a lot of decks are really reliant on getting those extra dice from upgrades. And if your opponent has a really scary upgrade or a turn 1 holocron, this just immediately says no to that card.
Yeah, I think it's a really good important card.
Check. Absolutely.
I immediately put 2.
Talk about it.
I put 2 in every single one of my decks immediately, and I realized I didn't need to have 2 in every single deck because people are already wary of the card, and so they're kind of scaling back a little bit. A lot of my decks still have 2, but some only have room for 1. But it's a really, really good, useful card.
I definitely agree, for sure.
All right, time for the last segment here on the Smugglers Den. It's the viewer questions, and we have a question today from Tingrin from the Knights of Ren Discord channel, and he asks, "I myself won't be able to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on boosters or singles. So as the game looks now, do you think the game will divide players into groups, those who can afford the best cards and those who can't? In a sense, how big of a chance will you have of winning a game if you're not going to put big money into the game?" I'll start with you, Travis. What do you think? Do you think there's going to be a harsh divide between the people who are able to pay for the top tippity-top meta decks and the ones who are just going to buy, say, $20 worth of cards?
I think that there will be a divide. I do not think it'll be as harsh as you might think. I think that with being a collectible game, it opens up this singles market to you where you can cherry pick the cards you need without needing to buy hundreds and hundreds of booster packs for that legendary. And that makes decks a little bit more affordable as well. I think that the problem with that will be that, like, if there's like one deck and that deck is like, you know, a 2-die Vader deck where and Vader's price shoots up, then that can really be a problem if you're looking to get into the competitive scene. But I think the game has enough strong characters that each bring enough to the table just out of the starter that just about any deck piloted well will do well.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you pretty much 100%. I think in any game, any collectible game, the person who has access to everything has an advantage. That's just kind of a given. But I feel like you're right in that it'll be less of an advantage. Especially if, like you posited the scenario where, what if there's a Vader deck that becomes the dominant deck, right? And it's 2 Vader, and Vader becomes $75 a piece. If you know everyone's running Vader, it's quite feasible there's going to be a deck that is the anti-Vader deck, right? It won't beat all the other decks, but if it's going to beat Vader pretty consistently, then that can be the deck that you build and put your resources into, and then you have the answer to the meta deck. So I agree with you, though, that there's all kinds of good characters and cards, and I've been scouring them, and to be honest, most of the legendaries are not necessarily as good as the rares. Like Grievous is amazing. Yeah. He's a rare. Dooku is a rare. He's amazing. These are going to be staples build around cards that you should be able to get your hands on. And I think it's really interesting. It's going to depend sort of on what the pricing becomes. Because you get a legendary 1 in every 6 packs, I feel like there should be kind of a cap on the cost of most legendaries. I can see Vader and Luke being expensive because they're Vader and Luke. So I'm just kind of praying that they're not the deck, right? I want them to be good, but I don't want it to be like, well, you're either playing the Vader deck or you lose. That'll be a problem.
So long as there's not just one deck, I don't think it'll be as big a problem. Or I should say probably as long as there's not as long as there's like more than 2 decks or something like that, it shouldn't be much of a problem. And as far as I've seen so far, and I'm hopeful of this, they're not going to be printing cards that are more powerful just because they're rare. At least from what I can tell in the starter set, legendary does not mean inherently better than rare. Yeah, as you mentioned, which I hope continues.
It often means cooler. Like, Vader's a badass. Even if he was terrible, he's still Vader. So he's a legendary, right? Luke is a primary character in the series. He's a legendary. And then a lot of the build-around cards, like Phasma and Poe, seem to be legendaries, which I'm totally fine with, right? Like, you don't want to open your pack and be like, oh, I have a small card collection, and I opened a build-around that I need 2 dice for. I will never be able to use this, right? So by sticking that in the legendary, it's less likely that one of these people who are only spending $20 on the game will get Poe. It's kind of unlikely.
Yeah, and then then you have, like you said, like Grievous and Dooku, and Finn and Rey are actually really good for the light side out of the starter. They're like great package characters.
Yep.
And you get all these options to go forward that doesn't revolve around legendaries at the moment, and I hope that continues.
Yeah, me too. As I said before, I have my Grievous Dooku deck that I put a video up for that has not even a single legendary in it, and it's really, really strong.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Travis, thanks so much for coming on the relaunch, the rebranding of the Smugglers Den. I know I had a great time. I'm having a great time with Star Wars Destiny. Next weekend is going to be the pre-release parties. December 1st, the game is released. Travis, how much have you pre-ordered? I'm going to ask you. We're going to end there.
I have pre-ordered a couple of starters and not a booster pack yet. So I'm hoping to pick up some boosters at the pre-launch parties. I have several around my area. I'm planning to hit up and see what I get, and then see how hooked I become, because those packs look pretty pretty fun to open.
Yes, they are. I'm just going to put something up here. FFG was really generous and sent me 12 packs to open. You can check out the pack opening video I made. By the way, it's my first ever, so they're like upside down. The video's terrible. But I did open some awesome cards. There's Han, legendary. There's Luke, legendary. Oh my goodness, my daughter and I opened them together. She was going crazy. It was a lot of fun to open packs. I too have pre-ordered one of each starter, 2 boxes, but I'm going to go to pre-releases. I'm going to go 2 different ones just so I can get 2 starters so my daughter and I can play with our 12 packs. And I'm really looking forward to the game and having a blast with it so far.
Yeah, I do believe that I'm probably going to end up, if I can't get a starter at any of the launch parties, which is probably not likely, I'm going to probably end up ordering one as well and seeing what it goes. Hopefully, I can get my 2 Han dice real quick, because I'm having a blast with him on Tabletop Simulator.
I'm halfway there, man. Halfway there.
Yeah, you are. I'm jealous.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in for another edition of the Smugglers Den. And we'll see you soon, and have a great time at your pre-release parties if I don't talk to you before then.
Thanks for having me, Tiny.